I don't think we can have a discussion about DMT without having a discussion about spirituality as well. I think the same can be said for just about all psychedelics, seeing as how they all seem to be able to offer a transcendental experience to some degree. Many people report seeing and interacting with machine elves, jesters, guardians, unrecognizable creatures, and more. This DMT hyperspace seems to be a world of its own, with its own unique environment and inhabitants. This raises the question, which is the topic of this video. Where do we go when we take DMT, and who exactly are these entities that we meet while we're there? Having the veil of reality pulled back and being shown the indescribable, a DMT trip can be a mystical experience that grants users a glimpse of the unseen world. And I believe that that world that we're experiencing is simply the astral plane. Today we're going to be looking at the psychedelic experience, particularly the DMT experience, through a theosophical lens, and to do so, we'll be reaching back into history and pulling a book from 1895. That book is The Astral Plane, Its Scenery, Inhabitants, and Phenomena by C.W. Ledbetter. Okay, so what is the astral plane? The details vary among the different philosophies, but they all agree that the astral plane is a plane of existence situated between the physical and spiritual plane. It's a semi-physical domain inhabited by a complexity of beings as diverse as that here on Earth. A place that has a corresponding object for everything here on Earth. It's not a place separate from our physical plane, just another dimension of it. It occupies the same space as the physical plane, all around us, all the time, and can be perceived through the state or tuning of a person's consciousness. Now, this tuning can be done through sleep, trance, meditation, and perhaps the use of psychedelics. Now look, the use of psychedelics for spiritual purposes isn't anything new. It's been used by shamans in the Amazon for thousands of years. During ayahuasca ceremonies, shamans frequently report encounters with a variety of spiritual entities. These can include ancestral spirits, nature spirits, deities, and beings of light. And the psychoactive compound found in ayahuasca just happens to be, yes, you guessed it, DMT. Look, this video isn't a declaration of fact, but a tool for exploration that may help people with similar questions, and an invitation to explore this unseen world together.
Though for the most part entirely unconscious of it, man passes the whole of his life in the midst of a vast and populous unseen world. During sleep or in trance, when the insistent physical senses are for the time in abeyance, this other world is to some extent open to him, and he will sometimes bring back from those conditions more or less vague memories of what he has seen and heard there. The first point which it is necessary to make clear in describing this astral plane is its absolute reality. I mean by it that the objects and inhabitants of the astral plane are real in exactly the same way as our own bodies, our furniture, our houses or monuments are real. The names usually given to these planes, taking them in order of materiality, rising from the denser to the finer, are the physical, the astral, the mental or devachanic, the buddhic and the nirvanic. Higher than this last are two others, but they are so far above our present power of conception that for the moment they may be left out of consideration. It should be understood that the matter of each of these planes differs from that of the one below it in the same way as, though to a much greater degree, than vapor differs from solid matter. In fact, the states of matter which we call solid, liquid, and gaseous are merely the three lowest subdivisions of the matter belonging to this one physical plane. The astral region which I'm to attempt to describe is the second of these great planes of nature, the next above or within that physical world with which we are all familiar. It has often been called the realm of illusion. Not that it is itself any more illusory than the physical world, but because of the extreme unreliability of the impressions brought back from it by the untrained seer. This is to be accounted for mainly by two remarkable characteristics of the astral world. First, that many of its inhabitants have a marvelous power of changing their forms with protean rapidity, and also of casting practically unlimited glamour over those with whom they choose to sport. And secondly, That sight on that plane is a faculty very different from and much more extended than physical vision. An object is seen, as it were, from all sides at once, the inside of a solid being as plainly open to the view as the outside. It is therefore obvious that an inexperienced visitor to this new world may well find considerable difficulty in understanding what he really does see, and still more in translating his vision into the very inadequate language of ordinary speech. All who see fully on that plane agree that to attempt to call up a vivid picture of this astral scenery before those whose eyes are as yet unopened is like speaking to a blind man of the exquisite variety of tints in a sunset sky, however detailed and elaborate the description may be. There is no certainty that the idea presented before the hearer's mind will be an adequate representation of the truth. First of all, then, it must be understood that the astral plane has 7 subdivisions, each of which has its corresponding degree of materiality and its corresponding condition of matter. Although the poverty of physical language forces us to speak of these subplanes as higher and lower, we must not fall into the mistake of thinking of them, or indeed of the greater planes of which they are only subdivisions, as separate localities in space, as lying above one another like the shelves of a bookcase, or outside one another like the coats of an onion. It must be understood that the matter of each plane or subplane interpenetrates that of the plane or subplane below it, so that here at the surface of the earth all exist together in the same space, although it is true that the higher varieties of matter extend further away from the physical earth than the lower. So when we speak of a man as rising from one plane or subplane to another, we do not think of him as necessarily moving in space at all, but rather as transferring his consciousness from one level to another, gradually becoming unresponsive to the vibrations of one order of matter and beginning instead to answer to those of a higher and more refined order, so that one world with its scenery and its inhabitants would seem to fade slowly away from his view, while another world of a more elevated character would dawn upon him in its stead. The scenery of these lower divisions, then, is that of the earth as we know it, but in reality it is also very much more, for when looked at from this different standpoint, with the assistance of the astral senses, even purely physical objects present a very different appearance. As has already been mentioned, they are seen by one whose eyes are fully opened, not as usual from one point of view, but from all sides at once, an idea in itself sufficiently confusing. And when we add to this that every particle in the interior of a solid body is as fully and clearly visible as those on the outside, it will be comprehended that under such conditions even the most familiar objects may at first be totally unrecognizable. Yet a moment's consideration will show that such vision approximates much more closely to true perception than does physical sight. Looked at on the astral plane, for example, the sides of a glass cube would all appear equal, as they really are, while on the physical plane we see the further side in perspective. That is, it appears smaller than the nearer side, which is of course a mere illusion. It is this characteristic of astral vision which has led to it sometimes being spoken of as sight in the 4th dimension, a very suggestive and expressive phrase.
Sight in the 4th dimension. How fitting is that to describe what a DMT trip feels like? How many times have you come back from a DMT trip completely speechless, at a loss for words? Post-breakthrough, we often see things that we can't describe, things that we can't recognize, formations and shapes and forms that seem otherworldly, and we just don't have the vocabulary to articulate what it is that we're seeing. The astral world is already a complex place to perceive, and I don't think it would be a stretch to say that the use of psychedelics could further complicate this already complex environment. These shapes and these fractals that we're seeing, could they simply be average and everyday objects just viewed from a different perspective? From their true perspective, front, back, inside, outside, all at the same time, yet colored with DMT's signature flavor? Who knows? Could some of these shapes be entities themselves? Let's see. As fascinating as the astral plane is, even more fascinating are the beings that inhabit it. According to the book, it's inhabited by 3 different species. 1. Humans, both alive and those without a physical body anymore, aka dead. 2. Elementals. These are nature spirits, and they're living forces of nature. They're emanations of the elements themselves, which keep both physical and spiritual harmony. And 3, artificial elementals. Now these are interesting. These are entities and thought forms created by strong emotions and thoughts of humans, existing as a kind of temporary consciousness formed by psychic energy. Their appearance can range from simple to complex, and from elaborate and beautiful to disgusting and grotesque. I want to draw attention to these last two, the artificial elementals and thought forms, because out of all the entities I researched, it was these two that seemed to be the most probable. This isn't meant to deny the accounts of benevolent entities, but their numbers are so great, these artificial elementals and thought forms, and so many are the DMT reports that offer a resemblance to them, that I will focus on those two for the time being. Could these be some of the entities that we're seeing on DMT? Could DMT simply be retuning our perception, revealing what's already around us?
The largest class of astral entities is also much the most important to man. Being entirely his own creation, it is interrelated with him by the closest karmic bonds, and its action upon him is direct and incessant. It is an enormous inchoate mass of semi-intelligent entities, differing among themselves as human thoughts differ, and practically incapable of anything like classification or arrangement. The only division which can be usefully made is that which distinguishes between the artificial elementals made by the majority of mankind unconsciously. It has already been explained that the elemental essence which surrounds us on every side is in all its numberless varieties singularly susceptible to the influence of human thought. The action of the mere casual wandering thought upon it, causing it to burst into a cloud of rapidly moving, evanescent forms, has already been described. We have now to note how it is affected when the human mind formulates a definite purposeful thought or wish. The effect produced is of the most striking nature. The thought seizes upon the plastic essence and molds it instantly into a living being of appropriate form. A being which, when once thus created, is in no way under the control of its creator, but lives out a life of its own, the length of which is proportionate to the intensity of the thought or wish which called it into existence. A man, therefore, who frequently dwells upon one wish often forms for himself an astral attendant, which, constantly fed by fresh thought, may haunt him for years, ever gaining more and more strength and influence over him. And it will easily be seen that if the desire be an evil one, the effect upon his moral nature may be of the most disastrous character. Still more pregnant of result for good or evil are a man's thoughts about other people, for in that case they hover not about the thinker, but about the object of the thought. A kindly thought about any person, or an earnest wish for his good, will form and project towards him a friendly artificial elemental. If the wish be a definite one, as for example that he may recover from some sickness, then the elemental will be a force ever hovering over him to promote his recovery or to ward off any influence that might tend to hinder it. If the wish be merely an indefinite one for his general good, the elemental essence in its wonderful plasticity will respond exactly to that less distinct idea, and the creature formed will expend its force in the direction of whatever action for the man's advantage comes most readily to hand. In the case of the accidental death or suicide, a great deal of the grossest kind of astral matter still clings around the personality, which is consequently held in the seventh or lowest subdivision of the plane. If men's earth lives have been low and brutal, selfish and sensual, they will, like the suicides, be liable to develop into terribly evil entities. Inflamed with all kinds of horrible appetites which they can no longer satisfy directly now they are without a physical body, they gratify their loathsome passions vicariously through a medium or any sensitive person whom they can obsess, and they take a devilish delight in using all the arts of delusion which the astral plane puts in their power in order to lead others into the same excesses which have proved so fatal to themselves. Hunting again from the same letter, these are the Iasakas, the incubi and succubi of medieval writers, demons of thirst and glutton. of lust and avarice, of intensified craft, wickedness and cruelty, provoking their victims to horrible crimes and reveling in their commission. From this class and the last are drawn the tempters, the devils of ecclesiastical literature. But their power fails utterly before purity of mind and purpose. They can do nothing with a man unless he has first encouraged in himself the vices into which they seek to draw him.
These entities, as described, they have a symbiotic relationship with humans, feeding off of the emotions that created them in the first place. Look, an astounding number of trip reports have claimed that that's exactly what's happening, whether it be the DMT jesters that seem to provoke and then rejoice in the absurdity that they cause, or the commonly reported black octopus-like creature that feeds off of our fear. There's a never-ending supply of accounts that tell of otherworldly entities feeding off of our energy. As a matter of fact, entire conspiracy theories revolve around this central concept. There's also just as many tales of benevolent entities offering reassurance and guidance, comfort and wisdom. This range of experience reflects the diversity of entities that reside on the astral plane and their relationship to us. From angels to demons, to the Islamic jinn and even disembodied Nephilim spirits, the identity of these DMT entities remains up for debate. Personally, I think the esoteric perspective offers more clarity on the matter than anything, offering us an objective look at what the DMT world just might be. Just another plane of existence waiting to be explored and further understood. I hope this video has sparked some questions and offered a new perspective on our DMT experience. If we accept that DMT is a spiritual experience, then it might be wise to take the same precautions one would take when undertaking any spiritual working. Cleansing of the setting and of the self. Because I believe that the quality of the DMT experience depends on the condition of our mind, body, and spirit.